We are. Wouldn't he be so pleased to see this? Of course. Wouldn't he be so pleased to see his mosque working again after it was closed in 1908? Of course. I see the work of this community as the second part of Abdullah Quilliam's history. And there is so much to be done here. So much. Not just in terms of this building we're in now, 1 to 7, in making it a fully functioning community mosque, as Quilliam's mosque was in his time, but also in restoring fully that wonderful heritage of number 8 to number 10, as close as we can to what it was when Quilliam was running it, and also turning it into a heritage centre and museum for the history of this community. So historic. And that second part of the history will become one day something that will be looked back at by those who come after us. I'm pledged to this. This has given me new lease in my life, a new beginning for my academic life, and it was what I wanted. I wanted to be, as an academic, working in the real world with real people, inspiring. And it does inspire. It really inspires. Soraya mentioned identity. Identity is crucial for every human being. Crucial. We need to know who we are and to stand on firm foundations. I gave a lecture in the Oxford Centre of Islamic Studies. I used to open their summer school. And I gave the first lecture on the history, and I would introduce them to Quilliam. I will always remember a young Somali woman, a refugee, coming up to me crying and saying, "Professor, you've changed my life." I said, "Not me, I've already told the story of Quilliam." She said, "Yes, but that story is so powerful." She said, "I thought I was just a refugee and a foreigner here, looking for roots, having been taken away from my own." And she said, "You have just told me I have roots." My own community, my Somali community, were a part of this community. She said, "I have roots that go back." She said, "I now feel there's a place for me that I belong in this new country." That is powerful. That is so powerful. And that, to me, is the real history of this place. It's a symbol for so many. I think it can be a symbol of an even wider many. We've heard that extraordinary quote, my favorite, I may add, that we have created you nations so that you may know each other or learn from each other. It is my absolute favorite quote from so many that are beautiful in the Quran. This mosque can become a symbol of that too, because it's not just a part of the history of a Muslim convert community. It's not just a part of the history of a wider Muslim community. It's actually a part of the history of Britain. Britain has to recognize that it's been multicultural for a long, long time. And multiculturalism, like democracy, has to be struggled and fought for. But believe you, it won't happen automatically. It's under threat all the time. Here is a powerful symbol of that. Quilliam, one of my chapters in the book is called Quilliam the First Multiculturalist. And to many he was, because he was like working in a city where multiculturalism was becoming the norm. I'm sure he saw Muslims in this city way before he converted and went to Morocco. I'm sure he did. He would have seen them walking on the docks. He would have seen them coming off the ships. And I will finish by just saying one historic moment for me was the opening of this mosque in 2014. I was fortunate enough to be invited when the mosque didn't look much different to how you saw it when Raghi Omar came in. It had been returned to the community. It had just been got ready with a roof. The first prayer was going to be held, and I was asked to give a short history of Abdullah Quilliam from the exact spot where Quilliam or one of his imams would have delivered the khutbah at Jummah prayer. And I only realized it as I walked and stood there. And I looked behind me, and you could see the arch in the wall, in the brickwork, that marked that position. I was speaking in this sacred British space, sacred British Muslim space, for the first time since 1908, in the exact point where Quilliam would have stood when he spoke. Have you heard that saying, hairs on the back of your neck rise? They did. And I always remember 2 tears coming into my eyes. It goes beyond just being an academic for me. Believe you me, it really does. I absolutely want to thank all the other trustees for their trust in me, in asking me to become a trustee. I want to thank my sister Amira. You are a star, really. She's so humble, she's so Scouse, and she's so Muslim, in a British, absolutely uniquely Scouse way. And it's so right that someone stands up here, a sister, and talks about Fatima with a Scouse accent. It's so right, because that would have been the accent we would have heard if Fatima would have spoken from this podium herself. These were Scousers. They were a Scouser Muslim community. And they were a Scouser Muslim community led by a Manxman whose family had become Scousers. Working class, middle class, upper class, inviting into their community, a convert community, inviting in Muslims that were coming on the ships, Muslims that were settling in the docks, the Lascars, the sailors, the Yemenis, the Somalis, the Aden, the Indians, inviting them in to share a convert community. That's a complete reversal of anything that happened after 1950. Complete reversal. And it's just, for me, the most amazing story. I would just like to say also, thank you, Amira, for being my chauffeur. Those who have visited the mosque, I hope as many of you have for a visit, will have seen we're starting to put in the antique furniture, or the furniture of the period, into number 8. That is as near as we can get to the actual furnishings that are described in the 1894 book by the Turkish travel writer, who so kindly describes the rooms to us. We will get back to having even the Quran verses on the walls. So it looks exactly as it was at that time. All the antique dealers in Liverpool know Amira and myself now. When we walk into their shops, their eyes light up. So enough from me, but I just, again, want to thank you all so much for what for me has been a very privileged part of my life and of your community. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. Just a quick announcement. Brother Ben's wife has lost her phone. It's an iPhone. So she misplaced it recently. If anyone finds their phone, please make sure Brother Ben, or pass it to me if you don't find Brother Ben. As Ron was saying, I've been involved in this project from almost the beginning, since 2002. And I've seen the journey of it. This, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I will say, Abdullah Quilliam project is a miraculous project. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala finds miraculous occasions and helps us and helps everyone else. Today's gathering, your presence here I was sitting there and contemplating, is amazing. And look at how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala works. Abdullah Kullian Project, late Fatima Elizabeth Kate was the first British Muslim. And I'm going to propose to my trustees, and I don't know what you think, that we should name this hall because it's the first one inaugurating, commemorating her grave and her life, and we should call it Fatima Elizabeth Kate's Hall. What do you think? I'm looking at my esteemed trustee, Dr. Hamid, our senior advisor, Dr. Altaf Kasak, and I will propose it to the trustees, and hopefully they'll take that on board. It's amazing to see so many of you have come from very different places. Just one last point. I forgot to mention, just before you go out of the room, on the left-hand side, there's an exhibition room, which has been only finished this morning by a researcher, a Turkish young man, Muhammad Hassan. So if you'd like to have a look at that, it has some of the major significant historians. Oh, okay. No, I know you haven't finished. I just want to say, if you get a chance, have a look at the exhibition room, because I haven't mentioned it earlier. But there are lots of fruits and cakes. Desserts are still there. Please make your way slowly and bring them in and enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you so much.
Okay, Jazakallah khair for all of our speakers. This has been so informative. We do have one more performance to happen before we break for Salah, inshallah. We're honored to have Sister Jumana Moon, who is a professional storyteller and has been commissioned to write and perform an original piece, The Perseverance of Fatima. And this will be followed by Sheikha Marzuka Karima and the Fatima Elizabeth Phrontistery Choir, who are performing a Muslim's prayer, originally penned in 1892 by our sister Fatima Cates. I think some copies of the lyrics have been handed out to you all, so you can read along with that. Sister Jumana, could I call you up, please?
Assalamu alaikum. I hope you can hear me okay. Yeah? Bismillah. Thank you so much for the invitation here tonight. I was really pleased to hear from Amira and to be invited and to come with my daughter's madrasa, which is, of course, Fatima Elizabeth in Walthamstow. Although we're based in London, we have so much love for everyone here in Liverpool, so it's really good to see you. So, Bismillah. A young woman sits in a drawing room, her head bowed. She pores over the pages of a book that she cradles in her hands. The drawing room isn't opulent or wealthy, but it's tidy and neat. Patterned wallpaper, a grandfather clock ticking in the corner, a sideboard for the best china, a mirror above a heavy fireplace, a small painting. She sits, head bowed, under the hissing of the gas lamp. And as she sits, poring over the book, words reach out from the pages, names of the chapters, the cattle, the winds that scatter, the smoke, the fig, night. And those words echo with truth for her, and they reach up and they catch hold of her and they begin to pull her in. And that book she would soon come to call the most precious book that can be bought. Well, the book was, of course, the Quran. And the young woman was, of course, as she was then, Frances Elizabeth Murray. How was she sitting there in her late Victorian drawing room reading the Quran? Well, for that we go back just a little. You see, Frances had been born into this staunchly Christian family, and she had an activist heart right from the beginning. She had seen the trouble and the wretchedness wreaked by alcohol around her, and she had campaigned and worked for these temperance meetings. And even as a young woman of 19, she ran and hosted these meetings. So when she heard of a man teaching total abstinence, she was intrigued. She had to go and hear him speak. And that was how she met Mr. Abdullah Quilliam. He was giving a speech, a talk, one that we might find ourselves going to, on fanatics and fanaticism. And as she sat and listened to him, she could not recognize the man he was talking about from the person she had heard about. He spoke about Prophet Muhammad, upon him be peace, and he gave an account that lit up, ignited her heart. And it was so different from this villainous, murderous man that she had heard of. And as she sat there listening to him, his words stoking these flames inside her of faith, she was astonished to hear his account. And so she waited until his talk was finished, and she went to speak to him. And he spoke about the Prophet ﷺ and Islam. And in the end, he said to her, listen, you don't have to believe me or anyone else. Here, study the matter for yourself. And he gave her his copy of the Quran in English, and so she took it home and she sat under the hissing of the gas lamp, surrounded by patterned wallpaper, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. And the words that rose from those pages echoed with truth. And the names, the cattle, the fig, the winds that scatter, the night, reached out and caught hold of her heart and her soul and pulled her in. Many of us may have had a similar experience. Many of us may have read this book in translation and wondered at these names in Arabic, a language new to us, but the sounds of which echoed with such truth. And so it was for Frances. And she began a journey with the Quran down a path she would never turn back from. So while this path of wonderment opened for her, not everyone in her house was as pleased. Her mother, truthfully, was horrified. She had a virulent hatred of what she saw her daughter doing. She tried everything she could to stop her, locked her in her room at times. But still, Frances persevered and persisted down this road that she would not turn back from. She began to attend meetings with Mr. Quilliam and the other Muslim convert, Mr. Hamilton. Just the two of them and she the third. And yet they met with all the gravitas of the greatest universities as they sat and read the Quran and studied it together. And so Frances became Fatima and embraced Islam. I can imagine her walking to those meetings, thinking of what they would talk about, thinking of what she had read, but none of it was easy. None of those steps on that path were easy. Harassed, verbally abused, physically abused, even horse manure rubbed in her face. But when they founded that first mosque, even, she said it herself, the work was hard, but the community began to grow. And, well, the light of faith was planted and lit here in the heart of Liverpool. Still, the problems carried on in the mosque. Windows were broken, abuse still happened. And you know, as I read this and I imagined into their lives, I thought of Dar al-Arqam, that first place of gathering in Mecca, where just a few people would come, afraid and trying to keep it secret sometimes, to meet with Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, upon him be peace. And I thought of those first Sahaba, Sheikh Aisha mentioned, Bilal, Suhaib, Amr, Mus'ab, who himself was locked in his room by his mother as she tried to keep him away from Islam, he too holding on to those first few words of the Quran that he had heard from the Prophet himself, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So as hearts were planted and lit up in Liverpool, Fatima, at the heart of that, a dark and difficult chapter was about to open for her in her personal life, as she married a man she had been engaged to for a long time, Hubert Cates. He was a malign and sinister and dark presence, and his hostility only grew into aggression and violence. And as Sheikh Yahya said, it wasn't long before, a very difficult and violent and abusive marriage followed, and reading the accounts of that are really hard to think what our sister Fatima went through. But she made use of one of the first pieces of legislation around divorce and was able to separate from him. I imagine her resting, healing, recovering from this traumatic time with him. And then we see something in the records that makes me smile as I think here Fatima found her freedom. She found her wings and flew. As we see that in the autumn of 92, she boarded a ship, the Anubis, with 2 other female companions, Muslimah companions, and she set off on a trip. We don't really know exactly where she went. What I wouldn't give for an afternoon and a pot of tea with Sister Fatima to talk about that. But she travelled. Maybe the ship was bound for Alexandria. I like to imagine her, perhaps like many of us, taking her first steps on African soil. The warm embrace of the air welcoming her. Welcome, Fatima. The first time she hears the adhan echoing around her, Allahu Akbar. The first time she hears the Quran recited in the mosque, recited in the streets, the first time she looks around her and sees all Muslims, mostly Muslims, rather than being in the tiny minority. And I tried to imagine what it was like for her as she met people and introduced herself. I am Fatima from Liverpool.